Evelyn had always been a creature of habit. Every morning, she would walk through the tree-lined streets of her neighborhood, always stopping by the local park to feed the birds. It was a simple routine that brought her comfort in her later years. She was well known in the community, not only because of her warm and approachable nature, but also because of her son, Daniel, a billionaire whose success had made him a household name. Despite his fortune and fame, Evelyn had stayed grounded, continuing to live in the same cozy house where Daniel had grown up. One brisk morning, as Evelyn made her way toward the park, she noticed a figure curled up under a park bench. At first, she assumed it was just another homeless person, a sight she had sadly grown accustomed to. But something about this child made her stop. The boy, no older than 10, sat with his knees pulled tightly to his chest, his small frame shivering in the cold morning air. His face was smudged with dirt, and his clothes were frayed and too thin for the weather. Yet there was something strangely familiar about him, something that made Evelyn's heart race. She couldn't quite place it at first, but as the boy lifted his gaze, their eyes met, and she froze. His face, those wide, innocent eyes, the shape of his nose, even the way his lips curled slightly as he blinked. It was like staring into a memory from years past. The boy looked almost exactly like Daniel had as a child. The same quiet strength, the same hint of playful defiance. But how could that be? Daniel was white, and this boy was black. Evelyn, who was usually reserved around strangers, felt an inexplicable pull toward the boy. She approached cautiously, not wanting to frighten him. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly, her voice full of warmth and concern. The boy looked up at her, his eyes a mix of fear and curiosity. He didn't answer right away, just watched her with a wary gaze, unsure if he could trust her. Evelyn offered him a gentle smile and sat down beside him on the cold metal bench. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Jaden," the boy finally whispered, his voice barely above a murmur. Evelyn nodded kindly. "That's a strong name, Jaden. Where's your family?" Jaden hesitated, his small body tense, unsure of how to answer. "I don't have one," Jaden finally muttered, his voice cracking slightly. The words hit Evelyn like a punch to the chest. No family, no child should be alone in the world. She sensed there was more to the story and pressed gently. "How long have you been out here, Jaden?" The boy shrugged, his thin shoulders drooping under the weight of her question. "A while, since my mom died." A lump formed in Evelyn's throat. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. What happened?" Jaden stared down at the ground, his fingers absent-mindedly picking at the frayed edges of his jacket. "My mom, she was really sick. She needed a lot of money for treatment, but we didn't have any. She lost everything gambling. She always said she'd win it back, but—" His voice trailed off, and for a moment the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Evelyn's heart ached for the boy. His story was heartbreaking, yet there was something about him that stirred that same strange feeling of familiarity she had felt earlier. She gently placed a hand on his arm. "Jaden, would you come with me? I'd like to help you." Jaden looked up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "Why?" he asked cautiously. "Why would you want to help me?" Evelyn smiled softly, her eyes warm. "Because you remind me of someone very important to me." A few hours later, Evelyn stood in front of the glass doors of her son's towering office building, Jaden standing quietly by her side. She hadn't told him why she was bringing him here, and she wasn't entirely sure how Daniel would react. But deep inside, she felt this was the right thing to do. There were too many coincidences, too many signs pointing toward something she couldn't yet explain. As they stepped into the building's sleek lobby, Evelyn could feel Jaden's nervous energy. She squeezed his hand reassuringly. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. When Daniel finally stepped out of his office, his usual commanding presence softened as he saw his mother. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, his gaze shifting curiously to the boy standing at her side. Evelyn didn't respond immediately, instead gesturing for Daniel to come closer. "I want you to meet someone," she said quietly. "This is Jaden." Daniel looked down at the boy, his brow furrowed in curiosity. He crouched slightly to meet Jaden's eyes, and for a brief moment a flicker of recognition crossed his face. "Hey there, buddy," Daniel said softly. "You doing okay?" Jaden nodded, but remained silent, clearly feeling intimidated by Daniel's imposing presence. As they stood there, an odd tension filled the air. Then, suddenly, Daniel's gaze locked onto Jaden's face, studying him closely. The longer he looked, the more his expression shifted. First confusion, then shock, and finally something deeper, something almost overwhelming. He stood up abruptly, his face pale. What was your mother's name?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling slightly. Jaden hesitated, glancing up at Evelyn before answering softly, "Lena." Daniel staggered back, as though the air had been knocked out of him. He turned away, running a hand through his hair in disbelief. "Lena, oh my God," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Evelyn, watching her son's reaction, felt her heart tighten. "Daniel," she asked gently, "what is it?" Daniel turned back to them, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Mom, Lena, she was someone I dated a long time ago. We broke up, but I didn't know she was pregnant." The weight of the truth crashed over Evelyn, and suddenly everything made sense. This boy, this homeless child standing before her, was her grandson. And Daniel, her son, was now faced with a reality he had never been prepared for. He had a child, a son he never knew existed. That boy had been left to survive on his own out on the streets. Daniel sank into a chair, his head in his hands, overwhelmed with guilt and regret. "I should have checked on her," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's my fault, too. If I had been there, maybe things would have turned out differently." Sensing the weight of the moment, Jaden took a small step forward. "It's not your fault," he said quietly. "I don't blame you." Daniel lifted his head, tears streaming down his face. He stared at the boy for a long time as if struggling to absorb the reality. Then, in a voice filled with both sorrow and hope, he whispered, "You're my son." The room fell silent as Daniel stood up and approached Jaden. He knelt down and pulled the boy into a tight embrace, his body shaking with emotion. "From today on," he said, his voice breaking, "you'll never have to worry again. I'll take care of you. I'll give you everything you need. I promise." Evelyn, standing off to the side, watched the emotional reunion unfold. Tears streamed down her face as she witnessed her son and grandson, two lives that had been kept apart by fate, finally come together by sheer chance. She couldn't believe how much had changed in just a few short hours. The pain, the loss, the regret, it all seemed to dissolve in the warmth of that embrace. As the three of them stood there, united by a bond they never knew existed, Evelyn realized that life has a way of bringing people together in the most unexpected ways. It wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always fair. But in that moment, as she watched her son hold the child he never knew he had, she understood one thing for sure. Love, in all its forms, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. As they left the office that day, with Jaden now a part of their family, Evelyn felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had gone to the park that morning expecting nothing more than her usual routine, but what she had found was far more precious, a chance to mend a broken family and a new beginning for all of them. In the days that followed, Evelyn and Jaden became inseparable. Every morning, just as before, Evelyn would head to the park. But now she wasn't alone. Jaden walked beside her, his small hand gently tucked into hers. They talked about everything, from the simple joys of life to the complexities of the world. Evelyn shared stories of Daniel's childhood, laughing as she remembered his mischievous antics, while Jaden began to open up about his own hopes and dreams, finally feeling like he had a future to look forward to. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. They were more than just grandmother and grandson, two souls who had found each other after being lost for so long. They would sit on their favorite park bench, feeding the birds together, their conversations flowing effortlessly. Evelyn found a renewed sense of purpose in nurturing Jaden, and Jaden, for the first time, felt like he truly belonged. Meanwhile, Daniel wasted no time ensuring that Jaden's life would never be difficult again. He arranged for Jaden to attend the best school in the city and hired a private tutor to help him catch up on everything he had missed. Jaden, once unsure of his place in the world, now had a clear path ahead of him. He threw himself into his studies, eager to seize the opportunities that had come his way. Daniel watched with pride as Jaden grew, not only in knowledge but also in confidence. Daniel had big plans for Jaden. He saw in him not just a child to care for, but a potential successor, someone who could one day take over his business empire. But more than that, he saw in Jaden a reflection of himself, the same determination, the same resilience, and the same heart. Daniel began mentoring Jaden, teaching him the ins and outs of the business world. He didn't just want to provide a comfortable life for his son, he wanted to prepare him for greatness. Years passed, and before they knew it, Jaden had grown into a young man. On his 18th birthday, Daniel decided to throw a grand party, not only to celebrate Jaden's coming of age, but also to honor the incredible journey they had all been on together. The party was a lavish affair, with friends, family, and colleagues gathered to celebrate. But as the night wound down, it was the quieter moments that held the most meaning. In a quiet corner of the grand hall, the three of them, Daniel, Evelyn, and Jaden, sat together, reminiscing about their journey. Jaden, now taller and more self-assured, smiled as he looked at the two people who had transformed his life forever. "I still can't believe it sometimes," he said softly. "That day in the park, it feels like a lifetime ago. I was so lost back then." Evelyn reached over and gently squeezed his hand. "We were all lost in our own way," she said with a kind smile. "But we found each other, and that's what matters." Daniel, sitting across from them, looked at his son with immense pride, his eyes filled with emotion. "You've come so far, Jaden. We're the lucky ones, you know. You've been a blessing to this family. You've given us more than you can imagine." Jaden turned to his father, his eyes shining with gratitude. "I wouldn't be here without you," he said, his voice full of emotion. "Both of you. You gave me a second chance when I had nothing. I'm so grateful for the love, the support, the opportunities. You didn't just change my life, you saved it." Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with love. No, Jaden, you saved us. You've made our lives richer in ways we never expected." As they sat together, the bond between them stronger than ever, they knew their journey was far from over. Jaden was no longer the lost boy from the park. He was now a cherished part of a family that had grown through love, patience, and understanding. And as the night drew to a close, they silently promised one another that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. They had already been through so much, but they had come out stronger on the other side. For Evelyn, Daniel, and Jaden, this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, hope, and the realization that family, in all its forms, is the greatest gift of all.